Dr. Wang, you have engaged in extensive conversations with policymakers, business leaders, experts. How do they view the prospects of Belt and Road Initiative, especially in green finance?
I've been traveling lately. Of course, I was in Davos, in Munich Security Conference, and also last year I was in the Doha Forum, and of course Paris Peace Forum. We are partner of all those events. I found actually since the third Belt and Road Summit, there is more actually positive recognition of the Belt and Road because. First of all, I think Belt and Road has aroused the common interest because China was the first country a decade ago launched the Belt and Road Initiative, even though they have encountered many skepticism, criticism. But actually, for the last 10 years, China has managed to, assemble investment about $1 trillion and invest into 3,000 projects in many developing countries. So that has been greatly appreciated. I was actually saying that at Munich Security Conference. And Munich Security Conference actually take that part into their official YouTube and Twitters actually to say that Belt and Road has, it's a world development budget has contributed greatly to the world development. And also you can see actually China addressing this global infrastructure deficit. You have seen the U.S. followed the suit a few years later and called Build Back Better World, B3W. And the EU has proposed the global gateway. Of course, G7 proposed global infrastructure initiative. So actually, it's a good thing. All the major blocs are thinking about launch their own programs to address Belt and Road, address global infrastructure deficit. Stimulated by Belt and Road, which is a healthy competition. So I think in that front, the business I've been talking to, the Global South ambassador I've been talking to, they welcome this China initiative, and China initiative has taken the lead in stimulating other countries to come up with the similar plans. Now I think the expectation is that can they work together, like BRI, B3W, Global Gateway. And also World Bank, AIB, ADB, AFDB, can they work together? So I'm very pleased to see actually at the China Development Forum, we had the World Bank president, we had the ADB president, IMF managing director, AIB president, Mr. Jin, all there. So I'm hoping that in the future there could be some more enhancement of multilateral BI to meet the expectation of the global community, which is already, I think, enhanced quite significantly. But if we can do more, that is even better for the global community.
Talking about the infrastructure deficit, one of the key issues is the financing deficit. What do you see as the key challenges to mobilize financial resources? Because the development stage across the region are varied.
Yeah. That's true. I think particularly after the COVID and the pandemic impact for 3 years, the world basically has lost a lot of momentum, and developing country, we probably have 100 or 200 million put back into poverty, and there's urgent need actually to upgrade their infrastructure. So one of the things I think we should do is that one of the suggestions I would make is that we should have the World Bank and AIB, ADB, FDB, European banks to really work together. They should all have a slice of the budget to concentrate on addressing this deficit, probably also the green infrastructure deficit, where that should be worked together. Another thing I think they should do is really we should get all the financial capitals to really think about how we can work with the global community, like financial center in London, New York, Frankfurt, Hong Kong, and all those places. How can they find some common ground? And also PPP partnership as well. And then furthermore, I think that multinationals should be involved. They are, the key forces of Belt and Road or other infrastructure project. They should collaborate. And then furthermore, I think international organization like IMF and like G20. They should also collectively addressing the deficit issue, addressing some debt issue of those developing countries. They should stimulate local economy, equip them with the repayment capabilities, and lift them really out of poverty so they can afford to have more infrastructure projects. So I think it's a systematic approach to address this financial issue, rather than just depend on one country or one source or one player. We should have a multi-stakeholders approach, and that's why we're thinking Belt and Road, BI, B3W, Global Gateway should really work together as a global issue, as a UN really to put more emphasis. G20 should be more involved to really get this global infrastructure plan moving forward more efficiently, effectively.
So some people in the West are viewing this Belt and Road initiative with skepticism.
Yeah.
So could you elaborate on the progress on the fronts of high quality development and green development of this initiative?
Well, I think Belt and Road is getting more and more convincing now. For example, you see, particularly for ASEAN countries. I mean, the countries are initially skeptical, but now they see the miracle happen. Like the China and Laos railway, which is already operating for 2 or 3 years now. And then last year they had the Bandung-Jakarta speed railway opened that cut 4 hours into 40 minutes. Enormous good example, showcase of this. And now Thailand and Malaysia are talking about building similar speed railway. And then you probably will see ASEAN super connected in the decade to come. And so that is really good. And then you see good examples in Africa. There's also a good project. And also the Belt and Road has been also expanded, not only to the big gigantic infrastructure project, but also small and beautiful project. Like I know there's a Chinese company that does the solar energy generating panel for the African villages, which is very low cost, but then you can have the battery to charge your phone, watch a bit of television or lighting, reading the books. It's enormous popular in African countries. So that's a good example of how those big or small projects. So I think with this kind of a dedication, with $1 trillion has been invested into Belt and Road project in the last 10 years, with 3,000 projects. I'm not saying every project is perfect, but majority, probably over 95 or 99% are relatively, beneficial to the local community. So as time goes on, and also for this initiative, it's not just talking. It's not a concept note. It's really matched with deeds, with companies, with investment, with project after another project, 1 5-year plan for another 5-year plan. So I'm sure gradually the reputation of Belt and Road will build up, because that is really shared by the global South countries. Whether it's a debt trap or not, it's not that West countries says about it. It's really we need to African countries, Asian countries, ASEAN countries, Latin American countries, they are talking about. So if they are all saying, okay, great, we have a very beneficial, very productive Belt and Road project, I think that good message will trickle down, and then in the times to come, words of the mouth will change the perspective and perceptions of the narrative of the Belt and Road.
We're seeing some genuine efforts here at the Boao Forum to build consensus and foster collaboration, but we have to admit that we're now in a fractured world.
Yeah.
Do you think the consensus, at least within Asia, has increased or not?
Well, I think the significance of the Boao Forum this year is highly significant, because I think after pandemic, this is probably the first time that people fully returned. I was talking to Bloomberg, I was FT, a few international media. They are actually the first time to return back to Boao Forum. And then again, also, China has been busy this month. They just finished 2 sections, sent a lot of new messages. and then the government has sent off, released some new policies, more opening, more data flow, more visa-free policies and things like that. And of course, we had the China Development Forum, almost 100 global CEO come. And then Broad Forum, you have seen a lot of Asia delegates, and of course, even every part of the world. So I think the signal is clear. Asia needs to be more, of course, united and confront the common challenge like climate, like the pandemic, like digital, and of course AI and all those things. Of course, we need to avoid the conflict. How to peacefully resolve the issues in the South China Sea or even across Taiwan Strait. Are really testing the wisdom of the country in this region. So, and also across the strait for both on the side of both across the Taiwan Strait. It's important that the people in both sides of China we have to talk. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think this year Broad Forum is also building some new concept. For example, they want to have an Asian initiative. They want an Asian community, and they want to exercise Asian values. I chaired a meeting with Secretary of Commerce of the U.S., former Vice Minister of MOFCOM, and Vice Premier of Singapore, and Professor Justin Ng, and everybody. We was talking about the rise of Asia. And another one, I was talking to a number of overseas Chinese entrepreneurs, which is another roundtable by the State Council Diaspora's Overseas Chinese Office, which they also talk about Asian value, how to really using the East Asian value. For example, there's a lot of emphasis on the family. There's family value, a lot of emphasis on the education, a lot of emphasis on the hard-working, diligent. So those things can probably help to put Asia into some common understanding, so we can work together. I was just coming out of this South China Sea roundtable where they talk about how we can jointly explore, jointly collaborate, and jointly benefit. So if we use the economics common sense, if we really push for the common benefit, I think things can be sorted out.
One of the biggest uncertainty for China's economic outlook is still the relations between China and the United States. We have seen some latest development regarding the semiconductors, TikTok, and we have the upcoming U.S. election. And the scholars are also warning of the possibility of accidental conflict.
Yeah.
What is your outlook for this?
Well, I think that actually it's kind of silly. I think against the economic law. We all know David Ricardo's competitive advantage. We don't want to see the world divided into different silos. Everybody reinvent the wheel, and it's a huge waste of mankind effort, and which I don't think is sustainable. I mean, business community is not stupid. I mean, they realize how that can have a big losses. For example, China is a country depend largely on the import of energy, but China's spending on buying the chips is even larger than buying the energy import. So it represents 30-40% of importing global chips. If U.S. is banning that to export to China, it's their companies suffer from that. It's other countries actually is not happy. Netherlands, Japan, South Korea, or even China's Taiwan companies, they're not happy about that. So I don't think this can be sustained. I think could be for using these scare tactics or overplaying security games to really put Chinese at some disadvantage. But that takes a few years. China may come back again. So by the time China develops its capacity, I think it'd be a huge loss to the U.S. and other companies. So I don't think this is a right move, and it's really against the common sense and against the economic law. I think already, there's almost 100 CEO coming from everywhere, almost over half of them coming from the United States. It's a vivid example that a company wants to be in China and wants to collaborate and the government cannot really against the tide of the history. So for China, we just I think the absolute good is that we continue to promote open policy, whereas probably U.S. is pursuing over security alliance like. We see Five Eyes emphasized, we see NATO expanded, we see AUKUS, we see Quad, we see Camp David, we see all those security apparatus surrounding on China. But on the contrary, China adopted the economic globalization, where we launched Belt and Road Initiative, joined the RCEP, and wants to join CPTPP. And China has a variety of economic summit with African, Latin American, Central Asia, Gulf countries, and that's the right way. So we'll use the economic globalization to really confront this so-called security globalization or over security globalization. So I think in that sense, people over time will see that China is the junior real partner, and working with China will benefit. That's why you see the BRICS country doubled just in 1 year last year, and there's more country there's another 20 country lined up to join BRICS. So because China is there, China is the largest economy in the NATO, so in the BRICS countries, and so I'm relatively confident. I think with China pursuing this economic globalization, the tip of a balance probably will come as time goes on, and people want. I'm still believing seeking better life, seeking free trade, seeking good investment is the wishes of every country. A politician cannot stop that.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Okay.
Dr. Ma, thank you so much for joining us. So as a leading expert in green finance in China, could you help us understand the recent progress of green financing in China and beyond?
In China, we started the journey towards setting up a green financial system roughly around 2014-15. At that time, the central bank launched a task force on green finance and proposed 14 actions to the central government. It was later adopted by the central government, and then it became the basis for the Green Finance Guideline, which were published in 2016. And under the guideline, there were 35 actions, there are a lot of details, but I think the important ones are 4 pillars. Number 1, we need to have a set of standards to define what green activities are. Number 2, we need to ask the issuers and fundraisers to disclose environmental information so that we can make sure they do deliver environmental benefits, such as pollution reduction, carbon reduction, and so on. And number 3, we need to develop a range of financial products, not just green loans, but green loans, green bonds, green insurance, green ETF, green PEVCs, and so on. And number 4, put in place some policy incentives to crowding private sector money. And we've done all of these 4. And indeed, I think this document was implemented very well in the last 8 years. And as a result, China has developed the largest green lending market in the world. And we currently have an outstanding green loan of 30 trillion RMB. And we also developed the largest green bond market in the world, which has an outstanding amount of 2.5 trillion. So what did these instruments do? Indeed, they supported the growth of the largest renewable industry in the world, solar, wind, and so on, the largest EV industry in the world, and the largest battery industry in the world. So these are the achievements we have made in the past 7-8 years. But still a lot of problems and challenges. For example, we have not financed much of sort of small medium enterprises green activities, not much of a consumer activities in the green space. And we have not done much on transition activities, which mean that the carbon intensive sectors like steel, cement, petrochemical, they need to decarbonize. And we still need to put in place a transition finance framework to enable that financing to happen. And the disclosure side, we need to move towards ISSB-based sustainability disclosure standard. That's still in the process.
And you just hosted a roundtable on the green investment and finance under the Belt and Road Initiative. What are the key topics and what are the major insights?
Yeah, I just finished the moderating that session. We scheduled for 2 hours and ended up with 2.5 hours. So many people wanted to talk. I concluded by saying we have 3 key takeaways from that session. Number one, we need to put in place a green growth strategy and green finance framework in countries that need green finance. And this framework has a few key elements, including taxonomy, disclosure, products, incentive, and also capability of originating the green projects. The second takeaway is the areas of opportunities. A lot of people have highlighted that we need to do more in green energy along the Belt and Road because there's huge demand and we have a lot of capacity. In fact, the cost is coming down, for solar, wind equipment, and so on. So there are a lot of opportunity for whether it's Chinese or foreign financial institutions and equipment providers and MDBs to be involved in supplying these projects to emerging markets, developing countries along the Belt and Road. And the second area is transportation, which is highlighted by a couple of developing country ministers, and also the lady minister from Ethiopia highlighted the importance of greening the agriculture and tourism industry, which is relatively new from our perspective, because in China we keep talking about renewable energy, green buildings and so on. But still, I think in many developing countries, green agriculture is a key because agriculture is a large part of the economy, and we have to make sure they use organic fertilizers and so on, and making sure that these products are clean, safe, and they can sell high prices than otherwise.
And recently, concepts like transition finance and adaptation finance gained momentum. Could you elaborate on these and how important are they?
Yeah, transition finance, as I said, is a relatively new concept in the last few years. Before, we were talking about the green finance, or simple finance, which is focusing mainly on what I call pure green projects, such as renewable energy, electric vehicle, battery, and so on. And these projects, when they come to the operational stage, they generate very little emissions. Sometimes we call them net zero. But there are lots of economic activities in the carbon-intensive sectors, and sometimes we call them hard-to-abate sectors. Right? That's coal-fired power generation, steel, cement, petrochemical, paper making, aviation, road transportation, and so on. And the economic activities in these carbon-intensive sectors are much bigger than the pure green activities. And they need financing for decarbonization. But currently in many countries' financial system, such decarbonization efforts are discriminated against, because when you, as an owner of a steel company, you go to the bank, the Chinese bank will say, hey, you belong to the carbon-intensive, energy-intensive sector. I need to cut your lending instead of giving you more loans. So we need to change the system from standards to disclosure requirements to sort of an internal process of allowing these clients to obtain financing and to the product design, which needs to be linked to their performance of a carbon reduction. Adaptation finance, it's trickier because a lot of these adaptation projects at the first glance are not making money, right? For example, you put up a big dam to prevent floods and sea level increase. Looks like no money you can make out of that. It has to be a fiscal project with no return. But reality is that if you're smart enough, you can design some other profit-making projects along these dam or other adaptation projects. Then you can combine these profit-making projects with the sort of public welfare or charity-like projects, so that as a package, some investors, the private investors, may be willing to take up.
Could you elaborate on the progress of standard setting? Because we know it may be difficult to set up a universal standard, but what about Belt and Road partnering countries? Are we seeing a good start?
By standards, we can refer to many different things. For example, the green finance taxonomies. These are type of standards that we often refer to. In China, we have a green taxonomy for green loans, green bonds. In Europe, they got sustainable finance taxonomy. In some other emerging markets, they begin to develop their taxonomy. In fact, my team has helped quite a few, neighboring countries like Mongolia, Sri Lanka, Kazakhstan, and so on, in developing the taxonomies. And eventually, we are hoping that these taxonomies will converge. Instead of having 200 different taxonomy from so many different countries and jurisdictions, we need to make sure that these taxonomies are interoperable, which means that a major building block of these taxonomies looks similar. And that's why an effort was made between China and Europe back 4 years ago when we set up this Common Ground Taxonomy Working Group under the International Platform for Sustainable Finance. And that group produced a taxonomy that's recognized both by China and Europe. And it's now being used as reference for many other countries to develop their own taxonomy. So this is one area we can push for some convergence, including in emerging markets. The other area of what you call standard is disclosure standards. For any green sustainable projects, you have to tell investors why you consider yourself green, right? Because you either reduce air pollution, water pollution, land contamination, or you increase your energy efficiency, reduce carbon, but you have to measure these things and report them. So that's part of disclosure. Of course, it's not just the indicators, it's about the corporates that's raising money. How about your governance? Do you have a long-term plan to achieve carbon neutrality? And a lot of information around sustainability you need to disclose. That's why it comes to the need for a global standard for disclosure. Instead of having hundreds of different reporting standards, which may create a lot of chaos and transaction cost for cross-border financing, we need to move towards a more harmonized disclosure standard, which is ISSB. It's a sustainability disclosure standard setting body that was launched a couple of years ago. They now came up with S1, S2. These are two standards for the entire framework and for the climate-related information. In the future, ISSB will launch nature biodiversity-related information requirements. So I think we all need to move towards adopting ISSB as the baseline for our local or domestic disclosure standards.
Has the development of green finance been able to catch up with the demand of financing across developing Asia?
In China, I think we're doing relatively well in terms of matching the demand for green financing. I just gave a number this morning in another interview. I said annually China needs like 16 trillion RMB in terms of green sustainable investment. And we now supply roughly 10 trillion. So we're still a gap of about 6 trillion RMB per year. And in many other developing countries, the gap is even bigger. For example, in ASEAN countries, my colleague estimated that 80% of the renewable investment demand is not met, which means that the funding gap is as big as 80%. And that's why there are stronger demands for capacity building to set up a framework in terms of disclosure, taxonomy, financial products, and incentives, so that it would enable the financial system to generate more local green financing resources for these green projects.
Are there some innovative approaches to mobilize resources to meet this demand?
Of course, there are a lot of innovative products. For example, in the green lending and the bond space, there are now a lot of products called sustainability linked loans and bonds, which is not offering a fixed interest rate for the client, but instead the interest rates are floating depending on the decarbonization performance of the company. If you decarbonize more quickly, you can get lower funding cost. Otherwise, you get a penalty. And there are lots of supply chain financing instruments which can help small medium enterprises, which, for example, sell products to a major focal company to receive lower cost financing as well. And there are green insurance products which will guarantee certain quality of green projects, for example, green building, green equipment such as solar and wind and so on. So there are so many innovations going on in the green finance market.
So how effective are mechanisms like PPP in attracting private capital in this green transformation financing?
It is important, although we don't necessarily call it PPP in many transactions. For example, the government may finance part of a project, but the project owner can borrow from the bank. And the bank's money are private money because these are individual depositors' money. That's a combination of private and public resources. And most strictly speaking, PPP projects are typically involving two types of projects. One is what I call profit making, bankable, very commercial-oriented projects, and the other one is less bankable, less profitable, but the less profitable part is generating more environmental benefits. So if you combine these projects, you may end up with a package that private sector is willing to take up. Just to give you one example, in Beijing, there were a dirty river before, and if you ask a company to invest in cleaning up the river, it's not making money, right? Not making enough money. Then you tell the company that after you clean up the river, the riverside area will be given to you, and you can build apartments there.
A package.
Yeah, and the apartments is going to see their value going up because the river become cleaner and become a landscape, and this project to become much more profitable than before, right? Before you clean up the river. So combine the two projects, it become a profitable package.